Okay, so this is the greatest Batman story ever told, right? Check this out. So I think we covered the first video a long time ago. I don't really remember. If we did, we're gonna make that private. We're gonna cover the whole thing from scratch, basically here. Mariah's been screaming at me for the last year and a half to cover this story, and I'm finally getting around to reading it in its entirety, and it is amazing. Okay, so check this out. So Curse of the White Knight, right? This basically picks up initially with what is basically Gotham City back in like the 1600s. And this little segment right here is going to be exceedingly important, right? Because what this does is it picks up initially with a guy named Edmund Wayne and then a guy by the name of Bakar. Now, the whole situation here is that you basically have Edmund Wayne, who's kind of depicted as like a thief to a degree, right? And he's ultimately joined by Bakar, who kind of brings him on this idea of a mission of quote unquote purifying the new world, right? Basically the United States, right? Because this kind of takes place in Old England and all that kind of stuff. And so it's really more of like a religious concept to a degree, right? Like Bakar himself sees himself as kind of a priest of sorts, kind of like a warrior priest, you know, if you want to call him that. But the idea is that him and Edmund Wayne traveling to the new world is for the purpose of getting rid of a curse in Gotham, which is actually manifested in the form of a guy named Laffy. Now, by all standards of measurement, while this guy Laffy is depicted as a vampire, he is in effect a stand-in for the Joker at this point in time in really Gotham City's history. Now, for those of you guys who are really familiar with Batman, and you're familiar with like Scott Snyder's run in the New 52, this version of Laffy has no bearing on like the Pale Man, right? So the idea that like Joker had been taking Dionysium and been expanding his life and so on and so forth. This is a wholly separate thing, and they have nothing to do with each other. So I just wanted to kind of clarify that for those of you guys who may be a little confused there. The overall gist of this is that this really is a kind of holy hunt, and that ultimately Laffy is basically defeated and destroyed by Bakar and Edmund Wayne, and sort of cast down into the pits below Gotham, and like that's basically it. He seemingly dies there. Now, that's the depiction that's given to us. This is anything but, and there's like a whole nother set of events that go into that. This is why I say it's kind of Batman's secret origin, because it's basically going to take everything you know about Bruce Wayne and turn it on its head, and it does it in the most amazing way. Now, having said that, and there's a little bit of a back explanation here, which I think we need, in the original Batman the White Knight story, what you got was basically a story where Batman had taken some pills, forced them down the throat of the Joker, which basically, quote unquote, made the Joker sane, and it turned him into Jack Napier, just kind of his regular human self. In light of this, Jack Napier had actually revealed like this huge level of corruption in the city of Gotham, right? In the sense that you had something called the Batman Devastation Fund, which Bruce Wayne didn't know about. But what would literally happen is Batman would get into a fight with the Joker or some villain. It would basically lead to property values in that place plummeting. Then like the ultra wealthy would come in, they'd buy up all those properties, and then they would use the Batman Devastation Fund to basically fix them up, or at least the fund would be used to fix those properties. And because they were now considered great properties, the wealthy would in turn sell them off or rent them out to people because they were now a desirable place to live because it was just a better place, right? Gentrifying, if you want to call it that. That was just one part of it, right? There was corruption in the police force, the whole 9 yards. But basically, Jack Napier painted Batman to be this guy who was essentially operating in such a way to where he was basically lending Gotham City to a place where the ultra wealthy could basically capitalize on the things that he was doing. And he was literally helping to make the rich richer, right? So painting him out to be an enemy of the people and basically an agent of the ultra rich. That story was landmark. It was amazing. But what ended up happening is over time, the pills that Jack Napier was taking began to wear off, and he ultimately reverted back to his Joker form. And so that's why you see him here as the Joker, where he basically was captured and then put back in Arkham Asylum. Then he's kind of making his way through here. He goes to his old cell by basically holding the warden of Arkham hostage, and then in turn basically escapes. Now, why he went to his cell was of particular importance, because what this does here is it basically switches over to Batman and Commissioner Gordon on the trail and really kind of finding out how it was the Joker managed to escape. Now, there is some detective work that goes on here, right? This idea that, you know, the warden is like, well, you know, I was stabbed here. And they're like, no, you weren't, you were stabbed there, and yada, yada, yada. Traditional Batman stuff. But the big thing that goes on here is they ask the question, why did the Joker go to his old cell and leave, right? He could have just left, right? He could have just taken off and gone anywhere. It didn't really matter. Why would he make a stop and then leave? That's the question they have. And so what they end up finding is that within the cell of the Joker is actually a hidden pathway. And this pathway seemingly leads down into like this exceedingly old place below Arkham Asylum. And they actually find a body that's buried there. Now, given that initial intro that we had where Laffy's body was cast down into that giant pit, it's initially believed to be him. And to a degree, it's just kind of like, okay, maybe that's the case. They're not entirely sure because they don't really know what all they're dealing with here. In fact, all they really know is that there's a body buried here, and that's basically it. So they're kind of figuring out everything that's going on. Now, what happens is you pick up with the Joker meeting with a woman named Ruth. Now, the crazy thing about this is that he kind of hits her up and says, hey, like, we can sort of help each other. We can sort of do our thing, you know, so on and so forth. It's very cloak and dagger. She is a new character. We don't really know a whole lot about what's going on here. And so following that, what you do is you basically switch over to a guy named Jean-Paul Valley. Now, this is one of the things, like the way the story happens, it all kind of takes place super fast in the beginning, so bear with me here. That with Jean-Paul Valley, he is a guy that has a long history in DC Comics, right? He was introduced back in the early days during the events of Nightfall when he was basically the replacement Batman after Bruce's back was broken by Bane. He does predate that story to a degree, but he's like hyper violent and all that kind of stuff, and the guy is all tied into religious mysticism and different things along those lines. In reality, what you have here is essentially the same character, but there's more going on, and in fact, it's more nuanced, and I think it's better in terms of how he's handled in Curse of the White Knight than he was in any other way. The reality is that as a janitor in this church, he kind of starts losing his mind, sort of starts hallucinating, going crazy, and then ultimately ends up being met by basically the Joker, who appears in this almost kind of messianic form, right? Holding this giant sword, and then basically preaching to the janitor, right? Preaching to Jean-Paul Valley that he can bring him back to the guy that like curses the wicked or punishes the wicked and all that kind of stuff, feeding back into that religious concept that Jean-Paul Valley had before. Now, again, there aren't a lot of questions being answered here, but the reality is you basically have Jean-Paul Valley who's presented with a flaming sword, and he ultimately ends up undertaking the moniker of becoming Azrael. Now, for the other things that take place here, it is kind of Batman to a degree coming to terms with everything that's going on here. One of the things that they find, of course, with him basically analyzing the bones and then studying it, they basically end up learning that this is basically a guy by the name of Lafayette Arkham, and that there was a kind of story that was told by parents to their kids, specifically Commissioner Gordon to his daughter Barbara, kind of telling a rhyme, right? Laffy Arkham in the wood, eating children when he could, underneath a moon of blood swept away before the flood, basically that kind of a thing, and that he was sort of depicted as a vampire to a degree, and in fact, it looks like he actually was, but this is very reminiscent of like the Court of Owls, and Sean Murphy as the writer is kind of building on that, right? That's one of the things to know. Ever since Scott Snyder took over writing Batman and he created the Court of Owls, it's always been kind of a landmark thing or kind of a major tie-in to Batman stories ever since, because it was so popular when it happened. Now, they don't know exactly why it was that he was there, they don't know exactly what's going on, but what we do find out is that following the death of Alfred and a note that was left to him, that Batman ends up finding a chest that was contained below or within the quarters of Alfred, and in that chest is basically a journal. And the journal was given to Batman at that point in time because Alfred felt like he was ready for it. So it's kind of these small little pieces that are basically sort of coming together to a degree, and they all do come together in a cohesive unit, right? As a cohesive whole. It is a pretty cool moment because following that, what we end up doing is picking up with Ruth showing up to Bruce Wayne. And this is an important thing because this is when we finally start finding out what's going on with her character. That these pieces coming together first come together with Ruth. When Ruth visits Bruce Wayne, one of the things to remember is that because of everything that had happened in Batman the White Knight, which again, I'll have that video down in the playlist, I highly suggest you guys go back and watch it, that what we had found out is that basically Batman, trying to reinstill trust in the city of Gotham, intends to publicly reveal his identity to everybody in that city. Now, that's when Ruth shows up and she kind of asks the question, is that something that you really want to do? Right now, remember, the Batman Devastation Fund exists out there, and it's literally just a giant pile of money that the ultra wealthy tap into. The truth about this is that if Batman walks away from being Batman, right? If Bruce Wayne leaves the mantle behind, he hands everything over to basically the new Gotham City Task Force, right? That basically serves more of what Batman would traditionally do by dealing with criminals and so on and so forth. And Batman just doesn't really exist in Gotham City anymore. The Batman Devastation Fund would go away. And so Ruth, basically being an agent of what are quote unquote the elite, right? The wealthiest individuals in Gotham, shows up here to basically strong arm him, right? And it's just kind of like, is this something that you really want to do? Because if you did, think of the ramifications this would have, right? What she's doing here is not that dissimilar from like a cop, right, who like kills a person, and like a district attorney says, hey, like we need to bring up charges against that cop, and some nameless, faceless person from the police union shows up in their office and says, hey, look, district attorney, you could bring charges against that cop and you could hold them accountable. But God, if you did, it would just be a shame to know that if somebody broke into your house, there wouldn't really be any police officers who'd be able to respond. Like, imagine how terrible, how awful that situation would be. Imagine what might happen to your wife or your husband or your children, right? Imagine what might happen there. So there's just something to keep in mind if you decide to go forward with this. That's literally what she's doing here, right? She's like, if you did this, imagine the effects of your public identity having on like your friends, or what's left of your family, or the people who know you. Imagine the pain you might be causing them, Bruce Wayne. Imagine what the villains would do. And imagine if those villains had financial backing from a mystery source, and they were able to do things that they weren't normally able to do. Just something to keep in mind, Bruce Wayne. And then she ultimately leaves, right? Literally trying to strong arm Bruce Wayne. And so it's kind of a crazy thing, because following that, you pick up with Commissioner Gordon, who speaks publicly following everything going on with Jack Napier. Now, this is one of the cool things. For those of you guys who never really read Curse or read The White Knight, this will really fill in everything quite easily, right? What he says is, he literally says, as you guys know, I'm not a politician, right? I'm not good at like spin. I'm not good at telling you what you want to hear. I'm good at telling you the truth, right? He's like, I don't like cameras or any of that kind of stuff, right? And I have no patience for any of that nonsense. And he says, so I'm going to break the rules of politics and be honest with you guys. I hated Jack Napier, right? Unlike the voters, I didn't have the luxury of ignoring all the horrible things that the Joker did to his victims, and I was stunned when he got elected as councilman. Suddenly, I didn't recognize the city I was living in. I felt betrayed, because remember, one of the things that people had done is that even though Jack Napier was basically the Joker who'd been made sane, right? The pills made him a regular person, that they voted him in as councilman. And the response of Jim Gordon and a lot of people out there in a position of power who had dealt with the Joker before was, okay, yes, Jack Napier is the Joker who's sane, so sure, I guess they're separate people, but these are things he's done in the past. But the reality is, it was politics 101, and Jack Napier knew that, right? The idea of politics is, you don't tell people the truth. You tell them what they want to hear. That's how you get elected to office, right? Like, people want to live in a fantasy world, and if you feed them that fantasy, they will reward you with political power, right? That's how people are. And so when Jack Napier realized that, that's how he got elected. And so that's why you have Commissioner Gordon saying, like, for a long time, I refused to believe that Jack Napier was a different person than the Joker, that buried inside Gotham's worst criminal was Gotham's best chance at moving forward. But I was wrong, right? Jack Napier was not the Joker, and while he wasn't perfect, he did show us how to be better. And that's why we created the Napier Initiative. As commissioner, I ended police corruption, addressed the problems in places like Backport, and supported programs like the GTO. But the root of our problem isn't our streets, it's in our ivory towers. It's the ultra rich. It's the people out there who operate with impunity. And he says, that's why I'm asking for your support. Give me the power to stop the so-called elites, not as your commissioner, but as your mayor. And the funny thing about that is that in the middle of all this, the Joker appears, right? Like, literally, the Joker shows up, and he basically, well, he goes to shoot Commissioner Gordon. Not necessarily, he doesn't really do a good job of it. In fact, Commissioner Gordon just kind of beats the crap out of Jack Napier, like pummels him. But the whole thing about this is literally the Joker's like, here's the thing, guys. You can listen to what this guy's telling you, and you can listen to him saying he wants to clean everything up. But the reality here is Commissioner Gordon is about as inept of a cop as anyone can be, right? Like, this guy's terrible. Like, not only is he an inept police officer, he's a cheating husband, he's a terrible father, he's so stupid, he's such a terrible detective, he didn't even know his daughter was operating as Batgirl. And literally, Joker broadcasts to everybody in the city of Gotham who Batgirl's identity is. And so at that point, you literally switch over to John Paul Valley, right, to Azrael, who appears before Ruth. And that's when you find out what his role in all of this is. That what Ruth says is, okay, we're not going to be able to get Batman to play ball. We're not going to be able to get Bruce Wayne to step down as Batman in any meaningful way. If he does, it won't be a way that works for us. So we need somebody to replace him. So they're bringing in Jean-Paul Valley to basically take out Batman and then to replace Batman and effectively be their agent. Here's the thing, they don't know what they're getting into, right? Like, you guys remember that line from what is it, The Dark Knight, when Alfred was talking to Batman and he was telling him about how like they hammered on the criminal enterprise or the criminal entities so hard that at the end of the day, they turned to a man they didn't fully understand? That's what's happening here, right? They're turning to a guy they don't fully grasp. And even we as the audience don't necessarily know the full background of Jean-Paul Valley and how he got to where he was. But the truth about this is that in this story, much like in the main DC universe, Jean-Paul Valley is not beholden to the ultra wealthy. He's a man on his own mission. And so what this woman says is, we can give you all the arms and armament that you need to support you and your team, right? We can make that happen. All we need you to do is to play ball with us and to do things our way. And Jean-Paul Valley, ever the guy who's willing to do whatever it takes to complete his goal, ultimately says, sure, and signs on for it, and dons what is quite possibly the single greatest Azrael costume ever devised by man. It is, dude, this thing looks dope. And I gotta tell you guys, man, anybody who shows up to a Comic-Con cosplaying as Jean-Paul Valley and looks anything close to this is gonna be like the focal point of that Comic-Con, right? Like, everybody's going to be wanting to get pictures of that guy because that costume's insane. And just to give you guys perspective on how capable this guy is, right? Like, literally, Jean-Paul Valley and his team, they hack into the Batcave, right? While Batman's like literally going through this cave and he's like analyzing this document, right? This journal and so on, right? Azrael and them hack into it, right? And Azrael literally says the brothers were to divide the land and live in peace. But then one son rose against the other, like Cain and Abel. God cursed Cain for what he'd done, just as he cursed you, just as he cursed all of Gotham. I am vengeance, I am God's wrath, here to break the curse, to rise up against you and deliver this land from evil. After 3 centuries, the House of Wayne will finally be rectified. And so literally what happens is the forces of Azrael hijack the Batmobile, right? They literally hijack Batman's car and they have it start firing on Batman. They literally take over every form of technology in the Batcave and use it against Bruce Wayne. This guy, the only thing he can do is just flee for his fucking life. That's literally the only thing that Batman can do. He just gets out as fast as he possibly can before he gets sprayed down and before he gets destroyed. Now, having said that, the thing that Azrael says here, that's what I want you to remember here. The thing that Azrael says, right? After 3 centuries, the House of Wayne will finally be recognized. One brother rising against another. That's the central point among all of this, right? The central focal point here with everything that's going on. That's what I want you to focus on. Now, of course, Bruce Wayne, right? This being a comic about Batman, Bruce Wayne, he makes it out in one piece, right? What would a Batman comic be if Bruce Wayne dies like 2 or 3 issues in, right? So it'd be kind of nonsensical. He survives, but he's rescued by like Harvey Bullock and basically Dick Grayson. Now remember, Dick Grayson is not Robin here, but because of everything that's going on and because Dick Grayson needed help here, he had to tell Harvey Bullock that Bruce Wayne is Batman. He had to reveal that identity. Now, what Batman also does is he kind of reveals the situation going on with like Ruth and all that kind of stuff, you know, whatnot, them trying to strong arm her. But what we also get is him offering an explanation in terms of what's going on here regarding the events of like the Waynes and Bakar and all that kind of stuff. And so what he reveals here is he brings out a medallion, right? And he says that Edmund Wayne was the first Wayne in Gotham, that he came here to claim his land from the criminals who'd stolen it, right? And so what he says is Edmund was not alone. He had a partner named Bakar who wore this symbol, and Edmund was supposed to give Bakar half his land in exchange for his help. That the deal that was made is that Bakar would help Edmund basically recapture the Wayne lands, right? Gotham City, effectively, or at least the place that became Gotham City. In exchange for that, Bakar would get half of it, right? That was the deal that was made. And so the question's asked, so this guy who blew up your house is a descendant of Bakar, or that the Joker convinced us that he is. And so in the end, the reality is that Bruce Wayne just doesn't have all the cards. This is what he's kind of pieced together so far, right? This is what he's kind of brought together so far. But again, like this whole origin, we'll get to by the end of this, right? This is gonna be a lengthy video, just FYI guys. It's gonna be kind of a hoss, right? A big chunky one. But it is a cool thing because Batman does the only logical thing to do here, which is to go and find the Joker, right? And to ask the Joker this question, because if the Joker discovered this secret, the Joker's holding on to the secret, then the Joker's the only one that has the answer to this, right? But here's the thing, when Batman gets there and he starts talking to him, then at the end of the day, he asks, like, what's going on with Jean-Paul Valley? And the Joker literally says, like, he's my knight, right? The elites are my pawns, that Ruth is my queen, check, the move is yours, right? That kind of a thing. So basically, Joker kind of set the pieces in motion, but he's sitting back watching it all happen. He's sitting back and watching it all unfold. And so when Batman mentions Lafayette Arkham, that's when he seems to reveal to the Joker that he basically has all these little pieces here and there. And so what the Joker says is, okay, that basically Joker found the secrets, right? He found out what was going on here in the city of Gotham, and that what Jack Napier had told Batman is that the Joker had found these secrets, and that was quote unquote when the Joker was created. That Laffy told him a joke that was written in blood, the greatest joke in all of Gotham, and it's a joke that only the Joker himself knows. The truth about the Wayne family, that it's all built on lies, that none of it's true, and that ultimately Joker's been laughing ever since, waiting for the right moment to reveal this grand finale, and he finally gets to share it. So while he doesn't really give a whole lot of information to Batman himself, what he does reveal is, I know the truth of Gotham's origins, and I know the truth of where the Waynes come from. And what I know is that everything you believe about your family history is a lie. Everything you think you know about what's going on is completely and totally false. And so one of the things that Batman does here is he actually brings in Harley Quinn, who's pregnant. Now, one of the things to remember is that Harley and Jack Napier, that she had basically orchestrated everything that had gone on with regarding to trying to make Jack Napier sane, the situation of like Batman chasing after Jack, presenting him with the pills, forcing the pills down his throat, all that kind of stuff, right? Because Harley genuinely believed that the Joker could be cured. She just needed to engineer a situation where that would happen. But she also got herself knocked up by Jack Napier, and now she's preggers with twins. And so the hope of Batman is that he can bring her in and she can somehow quote unquote reach the Jack Napier persona in the mind of the Joker, which doesn't really seem to work, because the reality here is that the Jack Napier persona just kind of seems to be gone. Joker has full and total control now, and so there's seemingly no way to get him back to a state of normalcy. And so what this does is it leads to Batman and it leads to Harley Quinn digging deeper and trying to find other information within this hole that the Joker had discovered. Maybe there's something that they missed there. Now, they do find writing on the wall that seems to be written in blood, but they can't really figure out exactly what it says because it was wiped away by the Joker, or at least enough of it was wiped away that Batman can't figure out what it says. But what he also finds is that there's another body that was buried down there outside of Lafayette himself, right? Like there's something else there. Now, the goal, of course, is to dig that body up and to find an answer to it. But before they can, you have Commissioner Gordon, who's caught up to by Azrael, right? And it's really him, like Azrael just kind of going after Gordon, and it's just the next person on his list, right? The person that he's going after. What ends up happening here, though, and what it seems to be kind of a running theme going on in DC right now, is that Commissioner Gordon is ultimately killed by Azrael, right? Literally stabs him through the chest because he sees Commissioner Gordon as a person, one, working against the elites, but two, as a source of corruption and sin, because he was a part of that corruption at one point in time. That's one of the things to keep in mind about Azrael. Like, yes, he's kind of working for the elites. What the elites don't know is that they are on the list of Azrael. He will come after them eventually. But the truth about it is that his allegiance is to punishing the wicked and the sinful. That's really where his allegiance is. It just happens to be that for the moment that the goals of the elites and Azrael himself are aligned. Once that alignment ends, it's on like Donkey Kong, right? Like it's crazy. It gets really, really cool. But literally, Commissioner Gordon is killed here. In that moment, once Barbara Gordon finds out what's going on, she immediately takes off. She tries to find Gordon, right? Gordon, of course, is basically dead. And she immediately starts screaming at everybody who's there because they weren't there when Gordon died, right? Like, where were you? Why weren't you protecting him? Why weren't you keeping him safe? Now, the reality here is that they didn't know Azrael was going after Commissioner Gordon. And in fact, Commissioner Gordon meeting with who he thought was Batman, for him, it just seemed business as usual. It wasn't until Azrael revealed himself that he realized this isn't Batman. This is actually just Azrael pretending to be Batman. And that was it, right? Like there was really no means of escape here. So in reality, everybody was seemingly tricked by Azrael. There really wasn't anything they could have done here. And even like Barbara Gordon lashing out at everybody, it's her just kind of going through this emotional pain and torment of her father being killed. And as most of you guys know, for us as human beings, whenever we lose something close to us, rationality takes a back seat, and we're just looking for a reason to understand. There has to be a reason this happened. It couldn't have just been the wrong place at the wrong time, or my dad was just duped. Somebody has to be at fault here. And while it is Azrael, she's literally channeling all that fault in all the wrong directions. There's only so much she can do. And so what ends up going on is that you have this kind of story that's told to Bruce Wayne when he goes to visit Leslie Tompkins. Now, Leslie Tompkins is the one that's basically helping Harley Quinn give birth to her kids. Those of you guys who aren't familiar with her character, Leslie Tompkins has historically kind of been like, well, she was a precursor to it, but for those of you guys coming from Marvel Comics, she was night nurse, right? She was basically the nurse that would tend to like superheroes, sometimes villains, depending on the situation, but she was most closely related to Batman, right? In the sense that like Bruce Wayne would like show up to Leslie Tompkins and she would basically help him deal with his injuries or something along those lines, sometimes feed him information because of the fact that she kind of had her ear to the ground and so on and so forth. But there's a very close history there. But what she says is that she's aware of the journal and its existence, you know, that she knew that Alfred had it in his possession, and that the way this had played out is that they had discovered it at a previous point in time, and not fully knowing everything that was going on, they had gone to visit a guy in an alley they'd never heard of at a hospital that they didn't know existed, right? Like an old pharmacy is what it's referred to. Once they get down there, they meet a guy who basically has red hair with a white stripe. Now, for those of you guys who are familiar with DC Comics, you know exactly who this is. When I was reading this, I was like, is that who I think it is? Is that who I think it is? You end up finding out later on, it is Jason Blood, right? Which is really, really cool. It was amazing to see. For those of you guys who are familiar with Jason Blood, he's the guy that basically holds a curse where he's basically inexorably tied to a guy by the name of Etrigan. So that's literally Jason Blood's thing, right? He says, gone, gone, the form of man, arise the demon Etrigan. He's very closely tied into the DC side of things with like John Constantine, Swamp Thing, so on and so forth. Part of that dark magic and mysticism sort of thing when it comes to DC Comics. But he basically ends up talking to Alfred and those guys. And what he says is that this journal that he has in his possession that he had handed over to Alfred, that he had basically taken it from the Joker. The Joker was the first one to discover it. Again, the Joker had found this journal and all those documents when he had found himself in that hole. And that the journal itself is basically a warning, but he ends up presenting it and saying like, you need to give this to Bruce Wayne. Bruce Wayne needs to know about this. Maybe not right now, but he needs to know when the time is right, because at the time this meeting is taking place between Alfred and Leslie and Jason Blood, this is taking place right around the time when Bruce Wayne first started acting as Batman. He wasn't like the polished version. He's like, you know, figuring it out. He's kind of been Batman for like a year or two or something like that, but now is not the time to present him with any of that information. But literally Jason says, when the time comes, you need to present this to him. He has every right to know about the truth and the history of the Wayne family. And so before they can really do anything else, Jason Blood and everything around them vanish. They quite literally disappear in front of their faces. And so that's why this is being presented to Bruce Wayne at this moment right now. What you also end up finding here is that there is basically a map that shows the landscape of Gotham back at that point in time. But the maps don't line up, right? The current form of Gotham as it exists now is not the same as the way the map shows. There's a huge chunk of the area that's missing, that it can't be lined up. And so what basically seems to happen or seem to indicate is that a portion of Gotham was flooded somewhere along the line. They don't entirely know how, they just know that it was. So now the question becomes, what lies at the base of this section of Gotham that's basically been flooded, and why was it flooded? Why did it happen in the first place? And so before any of these questions can be answered, word basically reaches the ears of Bruce Wayne that Azrael's on the move. And in fact, Barbara ends up catching up to them, right? Batgirl shows up to Azrael and tries to take all of them out. Now, the reality here is she's fighting recklessly and she's fighting full of emotion and anger. And while that emotion and anger is being channeled in the right direction, the first thing Bruce Wayne would tell her is, this is foolish, right? It's a foolish thing for you to do, because the truth is that fighting with emotion and anger, all you have to do is make a mistake and your enemy will gain the upper hand. In this case, you're talking about guys like Azrael, and you're talking about Jean-Paul Valley, who by this point is kind of a mystery in terms of how they function, but ex-military training is what everybody's seemingly picking up on, right? That these guys are functioning like some older military group. And so they fight with precision. Jean-Paul Valley gets the upper hand on Barbara Gordon immediately and literally banes this girl in the sense that like he breaks her back, right? Literally just seems to paralyze this girl, even if only momentarily. Batman steps in, and the reality is, as capable as Batman is, Jean-Paul Valley gets the upper hand quite readily, and they ultimately leave, right? Like literally the response of Jean-Paul Valley's forces is like, we have to leave here, right? Like the forces of the cops are showing up here. We can't fight all those guys. We can't overpower all of them. So in the moment, Azrael got the upper hand on Batman. He beat him, and he was going to kill him. Right, but of course they end up basically taking off and kind of leave Batman to grab Barbara Gordon and take her back to a place of recovery. But at that point, what you have are two things going on at the same time. The first is you have the funeral of Commissioner Gordon, which most everybody attends. And the second thing is that you have Batman who does not attend that funeral. Instead, what Batman does is he goes to the section of Gotham City, which seems to have been flooded, and he starts exploring it. And what he finds is that way down, right deep below these waters, that you have what looks like this older little village. And in this old little village, you've got a cross that belongs to a group called the Church of St. Dumas. And so what Batman does is he pieces everything together, and he literally says, okay, right, meeting with Barbara Gordon, meeting with Dick Grayson, this is when Batman seemingly figures out all the pieces, right? He gets everything together, and this is when he makes his presentation, and he says, okay, so here's what's actually going on here, right? I figured out the actual origin of Gotham. He says that we've always believed that Gotham began as a small village on the coast. That's why the Journal's map is so strange. It places the village in the wrong place, on the edge of a large bay that extended inland in an area that we now know as the Gotham Reservoir. But the Journal is accurate. I found the lost settlement beneath the reservoir. Someone tried to erase our early history by flooding it. And when the question's asked, who did this? The response of Batman is Edmund Wayne, right? That with Arkham dead, right, Lafayette Arkham basically being killed, Edmund had reclaimed his inheritance, but rather than honoring his promise to give Bakar half of Gotham, Edmund killed him, right? As Lord of Gotham, he convinced the British to help him purge the entire valley so they could turn it into one of the most valuable ports in the New World. That he erased all evidence of Bakar and the chapel of St. Dumas by damming the river and flooding the valley, and that all the villagers lost their homes. Those who couldn't afford to leave were resettled in a place that we now call Backport, that Edmund redrew the coastline as the land below the lake dried up. Then he built a new settlement by selling property to the East India Company. That's the truth about Gotham, about how the Wayne fortune started in the New World, and that's why Joker sent Azrael after me by reviving the descendant of Bakar. Joker wants to expose the cover-up and destroy the Wayne legacy. That basically Azrael seemingly knows all of this, right? And that's why Azrael is going after Batman. It's a blood feud, right? Your ancestor killed my ancestor, so now I'm gonna kill you in return. Here's the crazy thing about this. None of this is true. Batman's got it all wrong. He's got it all wrong, and it's amazing. It's one of these instances where Batman tries to put it all together and Batman gets the pieces put wrong. So here's the question: what's the actual truth? Okay, so let's get into this, right? I know you guys think I'm gonna leave you on a cliffhanger. I'm not. I told you this is gonna be a beefy video, right? So let's get into this, right? One of the things that happens is you have Harley Quinn who goes to visit Joker in the belief, or under the belief, that she can talk to Jack, and Jack can give her the information that the Joker won't reveal. But remember, almost nobody can get the Jack Napier persona out of the Joker, right? It seems to be too far gone. So when she shows up with her kids in tow, right, her twins in tow, she tries to talk to the Joker, she tries to get Jack Napier's personality to come out, but it just can't be done. And the Joker even just kind of makes fun of her and laughs at her, right? Like, I love this idea that you really believe that you can like reach into Jack Napier and you can somehow get his personality to come out. It's adorable and it's cute, but like, it's not gonna happen, right? None of that's gonna take place. And so she ultimately says, okay, fine, goodbye, Jack, like, I love you. And that's when the Jack Napier persona snaps back, right? That just declaration of love. But the next thing you end up doing is picking up on the Gotham City Police Department that have a blood sample of Azrael. When they test this, they end up basically handing it over to one of the guys who has an has a military contact. This military contact hands over a whole bunch of classified evidence, and this guy basically says, okay, so the deal behind this is that this guy's Jean-Paul Valley, right? An ex-Green Beret, right? A military vet. This guy is Special Forces forces. He's the best of the best, right? That's literally what this guy is. He's ridiculously capable. And so what ends up going on is they're like, we have to be aware because the team he has working for him, these guys are hardcore, right? They were a wet work team back in the day, toppling governments, all that kind of stuff. They specialize in taking out guys like us. And so what ends up happening is that you kind of jump back to Harley Quinn talking with Jack Napier, and Jack Napier kind of reveals everything that's been going on from the perspective of the Joker. Because remember, while the Jack Napier persona hasn't really been prevalent during all of this, he remembers and sees everything the Joker's done. And so what he says is like, okay, the Joker discovered the secret of what was going on with Gotham's history, right? He's like, I can't remember the details of the secret the Joker discovered, but he discovered the secret. What he did is he basically went to Azrael and then woke up the part of him that had all that military training, showing him his old history and saying, this is the actual history of Gotham. This is what happened to your descendant. Now's your chance to basically get your revenge. That's how Azrael ended up being quote unquote reactivated and going back to the person that he was before. At that point, you end up having Harley Quinn that asks him, like, do you recall everything the Joker discovered when it was down in that cave? And that you end up having Jack that says, yes, I remember everything he said, and I remember what was written on the wall. The problem is that if I tell you this, you can never tell Batman. You can never tell Batman what was written on the wall, because if that happens, it'll destroy him. It'll completely and utterly destroy him. And so ultimately Harley Quinn agrees, and Jack Napier tells Harley what was written on the wall. Now, before we get into that, what we end up doing is jumping back to Azrael when he finally meets back with Ruth. Now remember, one of the things that I told you is that she's allied herself with Jean-Paul Valley, not fully understanding what she was getting into. And so she presents him with what is basically a mechanized Batman suit. But what she says is like, you can't be our agent anymore. You're too much of a liability. We brought you in so you could secretly kill Batman, not so you could literally tear the town apart trying to destroy the guy. You're drawing too much heat. You're making too much noise. You're too loud, man. And so it's like, you can't play this role anymore. But that's when he tells her, my vendetta here extends far beyond your petty schemes of trying to make sure the rich stay richer and some Batman-esque character can ensure like the Batman Devastation Fund stays intact and all that kind of stuff. And so what he tells her is like, this sword that I have, this is a flaming sword. There was a special kind of napalm in my scabbard, right? I pull the sword, I press a button, and the sword ignites. Or I can just pull the sword and nothing happens. And so with her realizing this is effectively a threat and this guy intends to take her out, she calls in Bane. Now the crazy thing about this is under any normal circumstance, Bane is more than a match for virtually anybody. Not here, man. Basically, Bane gets wrecked by Jean-Paul Valley. Like literally Jean-Paul Valley takes this guy out until Bane starts amping up the venom in his body, increasing his strength and durability and all that kind of stuff. When that happens, what ends up going on is the forces of Jean-Paul Valley overpower Bane and they literally decapitate him, right? They cut his head right off. And so like, that's the end of Bane. At that point, Jean-Paul Valley takes his sword out of the scabbard with no flames. They tie down Ruth. He sits the sword on her and he says, okay, so here's what's going to happen. You're going to give me the information that I need. You're going to give me the client list for all the elites that exist here in Gotham. I'm going to go after them all and I'm going to kill them all. They're all sinners. They all deserve to die. And when she initially refuses to do it, he says, okay, so remember, this sword has napalm on it. So he takes a candle and he sits it on the sword. And he's like, anything that's a fire can ignite this sword. You have until this candle burns down and the sword ignites and you burn alive to give me the information that I need. And so that's when she starts dumping all the info. In the end, it still doesn't matter. He kills her and everybody else, with the Joker still locked up, right? The Joker having been caught and been locked up in Arkham Asylum. That what ends up happening is Jean-Paul Valley shows up and he kills every villain. Every single villain in Arkham Asylum. He massacres them all, right? Literally wearing this Batman mechanized suit and is like, I'm the new Batman now, meets up with the Joker, and then him and the Joker kind of start going on a bit of a rampage, kind of, but not really. Their goal is to capture the Joker, and their goal is to get information from the Joker. Now, the problem is, once Gotham City Police Department arrives on the scene, both at where Ruth was, where she's basically killed and Bane's decapitated, as well as the prison where Joker was broken out, you end up having Batman who goes to visit Jason Blood in the same way that Leslie Charlie Tompkins and Alfred had done. And this is where you get the backstory of basically Jean-Paul Valley. And what Jason says is that he is part of a member of the Order of St. Dumas, that unlike the main DC universe where it's a clandestine church organization that exists out there, that here in this story, Jason Blood is the one who runs it, that he came across Azrael or Jean-Paul Valley when he was a kid, and he had tried to teach him to be a soldier, to be a knight of the Order of St. Dumas. The problem with this is that where those guys are trained as assassins, they're highly capable, that there was a kind of darkness in Jean-Paul Valley. And as a result of that Jason Blood could only do so much. But the reality here is that Jason realized that when it came to Jean-Paul Valley, he was just too extreme, that he just couldn't really be maintained. And as a result of that, they ended up casting him out of the order. Now, the other part of this is that he talks to Batman about the journal and everything with Edmund Wayne. And Batman reveals, like, I know the story of what's going on here, right? I know that, like, Edmund Wayne killed Bakar and all that kind of stuff, you know, all that information. And that's when Jason Blood's like, okay, but see, that's the thing though, you're wrong about everything, right? If that's really what you think, Bruce Wayne, you put all the pieces, like, you put this puzzle together wrong. You have the pieces in the wrong place. That's not what happened. I'm not going to tell you what's happened, but what I am going to tell you is there's a lot more going on here. The only thing that he's willing to reveal here is that he says there's more to the story than what's in the journal. The Order of St. Dumas had sent Bakar to Gotham on a quest to bring peace to the valley, right? To save the lost souls by teaching them the word of God, that he was designed to be a missionary. And he says, but rather than convert the sinners, he ultimately joined them. So we banished him from the order. And he says that's the issue, is that when it came down to this, that Bakar wouldn't go quietly, right? He wanted vengeance. So he seized power by finding the last Wayne, right? Finding Edmund Wayne. And he says once they arrived here, Bakar set his plan in motion. In order to overthrow the criminal empire of Gotham, Bakar insisted they pose as criminals themselves. They became thieves and smugglers, getting to know every pirate kidnapper who passed through Gotham. They studied and they learned their weaknesses. They got close with them. And so it wasn't long before Edmund fell under Gotham's spell. And that's what this valley does to people. It seduces them, right? For 2 years, Bakar waited, biding his time and allowing Edmund's heart to become as dark as the men they swore to overthrow. Once Edmund's transformation was complete, there was only one thing left for Bakar to do, and that was to turn him into a killer. It was the only way to reclaim Gotham by eliminating everybody who stood in their way. They started at the docks and worked their way up to the highest cliff, the home of Laffy Arkham, the vampire of Gotham Valley. With Laffy gone, the two men were supposed to divide the valley in half. But Bakar had other plans. And so that's when Batman's kind of like, okay, so Edmund didn't kill Bakar in cold blood. He was just defending himself, right? He kind of asked this question, and that's when Jason Blood is like, I'm not going to give you all the answers, Bruce. Right? All I can tell you is this: I believe God has a path for everyone, and it's up to each of us to discover our own truths. And that's basically it. That's all the information that he gets. So he gets a little bit of a correction in terms of his perception of what's going on, but the reality is he doesn't get the whole picture. And so what ends up happening is you basically have Batman working alongside Harley Quinn, trying to figure out the larger piece of this puzzle, and the two of them basically end up racing back to Arkham Asylum. Now, one of the things that goes on, I'm not entirely sure how much I agree with this. You do have the Joker that basically kidnaps the kids of Harley Quinn in order to draw out both Batman and Harley Quinn. Kind of a weird situation, but it does draw Batman directly to Arkham, because that's where Jean-Paul Valley's waiting for him. Under any normal circumstance, Batman would probably blow it off and come back and, at some point later, or deal with the situation. But knowing Harley Quinn and knowing Batman cares about Harley Quinn, that if she shows up and she says, like the Joker kidnapped my kids, you have to help me get them, Batman's gonna race back over there. And so it's cool because you do kind of have this moment where the Joker kind of bounces back and forth between Jack Napier and his normal self, or I guess his Joker-wise self. And you do have him talking to Harley, but one of the things that Jack Napier tries to do is that he does take over momentarily long enough for Harley to get her kids back. And he literally tells her, I have to kill myself of the only way to get rid of the Joker, but the Joker won't necessarily let him do it. And so it's him trying to do whatever he can to keep the Joker from taking the kids back or killing Harley. It's kind of a mixed in a weird situation. It is cool and it is tragic. He does give Harley Quinn the gun the Joker was using so that if the time comes, she can pull the trigger like she needs to. But the reality here is with the fight between Batman and Azrael, this one's a lot more interesting because as the fight unfolds between the two of them, right? As this fight goes down, you kind of have Azrael saying like, the truth about what you've done here is your ancestor killed my ancestor, right? This place belongs to me, right? It's my territory, right? Like it's my land. Your ancestor took it over, right? Your entire lineage is one of betrayal. And that's where things are really kind of funny is because what ends up happening, the Joker chimes in and he's like, you've got it wrong, right? You have everything wrong here. It was not Bakar who died next to Laffy. It was Edmund. Edmund Wayne was the one who died there. And when Batman's like, what are you talking about? The response of the Joker is, with Laffy Arkham dead, Bakar's plan was almost complete. All he needed to do was eliminate Edmund. All he had to do was kill that guy. That was the last thing he had to do, which is exactly what he did. He killed Edmund Wayne. Then he could steal his identity, flood the valley, and start rebuilding Gotham on my own, right? Edmund barely survived the fall into the well, and what he did in his own blood, what was written on the wall is, I am Edmund Wayne, and that Bakar was basically an imposter. And so the reality here is that Bruce Wayne is not descended from the Wayne family. He's not the son of Edmund Wayne. He's the son of Bakar, right? Like literally his entire lineage is a lie, right? Bakar stole the identity of Edmund Wayne, passed himself off as Edmund Wayne, started popping out kids left and right. And so in truth, like what's really going on here is that it's all false. None of it's real, man. And it's the most insane revelation ever. The Joker even says that, right? He's like, that's why I'm always smiling, Batman, because of the joke I was told in Edmund's tomb, that Gotham's greatest hero is descended from criminals. You're using a stolen fortune to wage a war on crime that your family helped to create. Don't you get it? You're not really a Wayne. Azrael is. Azrael is the only Wayne here, right? It's crazy. So like, Azrael is the rightful heir to all this territory, to all this land. And so it's a ridiculously insane revelation. Now, of course, once that revelation comes to fruition and Batman realizes he's not a Wayne and he never was, that John Paul Valley is the only Wayne standing here, then of course you have Harley Quinn who pulls the gun, pulls the trigger, and basically kills the Joker on the spot. But with that being said, guys, I'm gonna leave you guys on a cliffhanger, man, because honestly, I haven't read the last 2 issues yet. I need to. We'll be back next week. Thank you all for watching. I will catch you all later. Peace.